Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. This game was absolutely fascinating. We saw attack, counter-attack, subtle strategy, not so subtle tactics, and a remarkable finish. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, final round of the preliminary phase in the FIDE Grand Prix tournament in Belgrade. Now, Mamedyarov was in a must-win situation. He had to beat Vachier-Lagrave to overtake him, and then he would win the group. Remember, it's just the group winners that go through to the knockout phase. So, a lot on the line in this game. So, Mamedyarov with white. And I was particularly interested in the opening because it's a Queen's Gambit, as many of you know, one of my favourite openings to play with black. And it's an exchange variation. And Mamedyarov has specialised in this particular system before. I think the great advantage of playing this exchange variation, I suppose for both sides, is that the pawn structure is more or less fixed at the start. You can see that there. Although we're going to see it changes a little bit. But that means that basically piece play predominates. So Queen c2, this is a very important diagonal to control, as we'll see in this game. Bishop d3 and h6. And this particular system I actually recommended on my Queen's Gambit Declined DVD download that you can get from ChessBase, where basically I present a whole repertoire for black. And here the most common move is bishop h4. And the point of playing this is that black now goes knight h5. So this forces an exchange of bishops. So after this, that frees black's game to a certain extent. But Mamedyarov played bishop f4. Now that's a little bit unusual because black is able to chase down this bishop. I mean, it's certainly not a problem if the bishop comes back here. Again, grabbing that bishop gives black more freedom. That's known to be fine. But Mamedyarov plays a very brave, dynamic strategy. He allows that bishop on f4 to be taken. So you can see this really damages white's pawns. In particular, of course, that pawn on d4. But there are certain advantages to playing like this, namely that, well, white has tremendous control over this diagonal. And, you know, those light squares, as we'll see, around the king are a little bit weak. Mamedyarov has played this way before. The game went like this. You can see what he's about. And he just went for it on the king side. So he's using that pawn on h6 as a hook to open up that g file. And it is very, very dangerous. Now, Maxime thought for some time here. Bishop d6. I say some time, about 6 minutes. Attacks the pawn and g3. So that pawn remains there. That's an important move. If the pawn is pushed, then white won't be able to use the e5 square as a jumping off point for the knight. That's the point. So that's why g3 was played, which just gives gives white a little bit more control so that he can still use the e5 square. Castles. Now, you can castle kingside here, but that's not Mamedyarov's style. You know, he is a born attacker. He wants kings on opposite sides of the board, and that means he can go, well, really go for it on the king side. Now, it's really important that black counterattacks here. Now, I mean, this is in some ways quite a typical situation for the Queen's Gambit Declined. I mean, usually with the pawn on e3, but I'm talking about with kings on opposite wings. Black somehow has to open lines against white's king, and here you basically have a choice. You know, I've been in this situation myself. You either advance the b pawn and perhaps push on, or, well, there are other things to do using that b pawn as well, or you advance the a pawn as far as it can go to open up lines. Maxime went with b5. I mean, it's debatable which is better, to play with the a pawn or the b pawn. Knight e5. So now we see the point of leaving that pawn there. That knight is supported beautifully by the pawns. And because the pawn is on h6, this is a little bit problematic for black. Let me show in a second. So queen c7 defends that pawn. King b1. Yep, important to step out of the way with the king. Now, why is this so problematic for black? Well, how do you get rid of that knight? You know, you'd love to be able to play f6, but look at those weakened squares around the king. And in fact, this is immediately fatal. That's really nasty. Okay, so what about taking this? Well, that doesn't work either, because now that's a very nasty pin. Okay, so what about taking with the bishop? Well, that straightens out white's pawns, and that pawn, you know, really is such a spearhead. It prevents the knight coming back here, a good defending square. And white is just going to try and advance that g-pawn, again, to open up the g-file, or, who knows, maybe the f-pawn as well. I mean, that's a beautiful pawn storm. Meanwhile, white's king is pretty safe on the other side of the board. So this is black's problem. And for the moment, black just has to play around it and try to develop a counterattack on the queen side. Okay, so what next for white? Because at the moment, black is solid enough. Well, Mamedyarov plays rook g1, and he just wants to advance that g-pawn to open up the king side. So black has to react quickly. Maxime pushed the b-pawn. It's also possible to play knight c4 and maybe rook b8. That's another way to go. But b4, well, he's not hanging around. He realizes he has to do something quickly. And I think he was probably looking at something like knight e2 and then playing c5 and an exchange of queens. Well, it calms the game down. I mean, there's still play in that position, but black should be all right. So that's why Mamedyarov played knight a4. Remember, a draw is okay for Vachier-Lagrave. He would top the group. Mamedyarov needs to win, so he keeps the queens on, basically, with this move. And that knight could land on this square, so that gets exchanged off. And, again, could be serious pressure on this pawn. So c5, and that gets exchanged. And this is quite an important moment in the game. You know, how does white progress here? White's king looks pretty safe. Pieces look good. Black is a bit underdeveloped. This is a threat. I mean, it's possible just to go rook d2 and perhaps switch from a kingside attack to playing on the queen side. But typically Mamedyarov plays in a very aggressive way, very straightforward way. He plays the knight to d7, which, because of the fork, means that black has to exchange that off. Now, Mamedyarov has done that because he appreciates that with opposite colour bishops, this is going to increase white's attacking chances. This is incredibly dangerous for black because this bishop is unopposed. The queen can bounce round to the king side to join in the attack. And actually, how many defenders does black's king have? At the moment, none at all. And where is black's attack? Absolutely nowhere. White's king is completely safe. So, very interesting decision from Mamedyarov. Of course, that pawn can't be taken because of queen takes bishop. So rook d8 expels the queen, but it only just comes round to f5, threatening a big check here. So g6 and queen g4. This looks absolutely terrible for black. You know, if you were going to ask me who won this game, well, or let's just say who stands better here. I mean, I would take white every time. There's possibilities to take here. Where are black's defenders? You can also go f5. So, for example, if this bishop drops back, I mean, I would love to put the bishop here. But f5, and then f6, followed by here. I mean, this is clockwork. So Maxime desperately needed to open up lines and get some counterplay. b3, I think it's black's only chance. Now, watch what happens. Okay, let's try f5. Just going for it. Takes, okay, the king hides, but actually rook b8 is just in time after this. In fact, it's black that breaks through, and remarkably, black's king, just for one move, is safe at the other end of the board. And in fact, black wins. Black's attack breaks through just a moment before white. If that's taken, then, okay, let's push the queen back, and then rook b8. There is just about enough counterplay there. So I think very understandably, Mamedyarov closed the position with a3. He thought for 16 minutes there, because we're already in the territory where you might be able to work out a direct win. So it's worth investing the time. And this next move of Maxime's is incredible. This is an absolutely brilliant defensive move. I mean, have a think. How would you play here with black? I mean, it looks desperate. As I said before, f5 followed by f6. Bishop takes. You know, these are, well, terrifying. Maxime played bishop e7. It's a brilliant move. Okay, what's the difference? Well, we'll see how he deals with f5 in a moment. If bishop takes, I mean, this takes cool nerves. In fact, white doesn't get very far here. You can try to bring the rook in, but there's this saving move. And although white has 4 pawns for the piece, well, actually there's going to be counterplay here and against the king as well. So black is just about okay there. But remember, Mamedyarov needs to go for it. You know, he wasn't going to risk playing to an ending where, you know, he has a few winning chances, but, you know, he wanted to go for it. So f5. And now g5. Now the difference here, of course, is that after f6, that can just be taken. But Mamedyarov goes for it with f4. Bishop f6. Now black's king looks a bit more secure with the bishop here. And also, that bishop points down. Mamedyarov exchanges on g5. Now, what about h4? I mean, it looks like this could just be winning. Queen f2 attacks this one just in time. And something like this, bishop e2, rook c8, followed by rook here. In fact, black is all right in this position, more than all right. So here Mamedyarov just took a time out for the moment to play rook g2, covering f2, also defending this pawn. And he's ready to play h4 to open up the position. What now for black? Incredibly cool move, rook c8. h4, threatening to take. Queen e3, defends the pawn. And after rook e2, well, this looks like black is in massive trouble in the position. But in fact, there is a brilliant defense that Maxime had clearly worked out well in advance. I mean, this is sensational defense. He played rook c1 check, giving up the rook. Queen takes d3. King has to go in the corner. Now black is the exchange down. Still faces this threat. How does black survive? Queen a6. Threatening the pawn. Also keeping an eye on the rook so that if the queen switches over, then just queen takes rook wins. And if a4, then d4. Followed by queen takes a4 check. So after queen a6, threatening queen takes pawn. Remember that pawn is pinned. So queen takes pawn check followed by mate is the threat. So a lot of arrows there. So there's a pin. That's the threat. So the king has to go back. And then a check. And the position is repeated. And that is a draw. Threefold repetition, that's a draw. Well, that was just sensational defensive play by Maxime. I mean, star moves in this game. In this position, when it looked, frankly, hopeless, or even here, to find b3, which gives black just a bit of counterplay, and then bishop e7, this, it looks like such a modest move. It is absolutely crucial. And yeah, finally, to spot this tactic at the end, amazing. So that brilliant calculation and brilliant defensive play from Maxime Vachier-Lagrave meant that he topped the group, and so he goes through to the knockout stage, and he faces Richard Rapport. That will be very interesting, very tight. Too close to call on that one. Dmitry Andreikin plays Anish Giri. Well, I would say Giri is the clear favourite there. Andreikin rated below him, and somehow Giri, you know, his technical play, I always think of Andreikin as quite a technical player, although he had a crazy last round win where he risked all to top the group. But I think Giri should be the clear favourite for that one. Anyway, we shall see. I shall report back to let you know how things are going. By the way, you might have seen that I publicised a stream that I took part in with Anna Rudolph on her Twitch channel, where Anna is raising funds for Ukraine, humanitarian charity, and I took part there last night, and we had great fun playing some very silly hand and brain blitz. But Anna is continuing to do some fundraising, streaming, and do join her on Twitch TV, Anna Chess. I'll stick the links down in the comments, so do join her for a really good cause. And yeah, I mean, I've donated, of course. I mean, I've been feeling pretty overwhelmed over the last couple of weeks with the invasion of Ukraine, and you know, I just wanted to do my bit. Yeah, I think we're all feeling a bit helpless at the moment, but anyway, do join Anna, and if you can, donate to a really good cause, of course. So anyway, I'll be reporting back fairly soon. Thanks for watching.